It has been 3 months since I promised a chapter on how my ex-husband, a Muslim, had married me for the green card and would give me pills and share me without my knowledge. I am going to try to not get my video flagged. There will also be a book available on Amazon. As I write, I am aware that there will be Muslims watching this. Therefore, I want to add that there are good and bad in all religions. I need other women to be careful and not fall into the trap that I fell into because it is still an ongoing practice. This horrible experience started in 1981 when I married a Muslim man from Pakistan after dating for 8 months. Let's call him Afan. I was still very young and naive. I had never heard of Islam, or that a country like Pakistan even existed. I didn't even know what a green card was or that he needed one. I just thought he was the most wonderful person who had ever entered my life, and I fell foolishly and deeply in love. When he left after 3 years, I went into a deep depression that plunged me into a dark pit. I lost all joy for life, so much so that the music that I once enjoyed and danced to could not even touch me. I was practically dead inside. It was the kind of grief that amounted to the loss of a loved one due to death. I know, because I have experienced both. It took years to figure out the truth, that Afan had only married me for the green card and that he was giving me pills and allowing his friends and even strangers to sleep with me as I lay unconscious. These men were coming into my home, and he was also allowed others to use me at motels. Whatever pills they were using caused me to have complete amnesia. I debated on how to present this experience and decided to explain the trap and then how it played out in my life. I was 23 and he 26. Afan came to Houston with a set of 5 Muslim men, all who were sponsored by the same wealthy man. This sponsor had 5 daughters, who he arranged to be married to each of the 5 men he sponsored. The young daughter betrothed to my husband was only 10 years old at the time. The sponsor brainwashed these men with stories of how horrible Western women are, that we are incapable of true love. Our marriages only last 3 years anyway, and we are active by the time we are 9 years old, all confirmed by statistics. Therefore, it is okay to use us in such a terrible way. The picture painted of how vile Western women are also makes it also okay to give us pills and pass us around. In their minds, this is what we deserve. Not all Muslims are like this, but in my case, dozens of Muslim men knew what was happening to me, and not a one spoke out against it or stopped them. On the contrary, they joined in. There is no telling how many men were with me, even in my own home. Several of their wives even knew what their husbands were up to. Yes, not all were single men, many were married. Here comes the story. After 8 months, we married and had our wedding reception at my aunt's house. Many relatives were there, including my father and my grandmother. I wore a beautiful gown, and my aunt prepared a buffet. We received lots of gifts, and he and I sat together on the floor to open them. Many photos were taken. I was over the moon with joy. I was young and in love. We moved into the cheapest complex in Houston, a dump that had roaches. It was his idea. I had never lived in an apartment before, and was shocked at the unsafe situation I found myself in. We were lying in bed one night, and Afan began talking about what he wanted for his future, including a big house. I noticed that I was nowhere in this vision, and said that I don't hear myself as being there. He said, "You're not. You don't deserve a man of my caliber." My feelings were hurt, but I didn't know what to say. I was certainly confused and just let it pass. I mean, we were just married. That was my first warning, but I was too inexperienced to heed it. One day, Afan came into the house and said right to my face in an angry tone, "I'm going to divorce you." It was apparent he had already worked himself up, probably with provoking from the sponsor or other friends in on the plot. I was taken aback. He wanted to provoke a big argument so he could stomp out and have something to point to for being the cause. But I wasn't the arguing type. I said, "But I thought we were going to have a real marriage." I had all kinds of images floating in my head of us having a wonderful life in our new home. We would invite friends and have cookouts. I was happy that my life had seemed to finally settle out and that I had someone who cared about me. It's so funny how we can delude ourselves in a relationship that has nothing to do with the reality of it. He and I weren't even on the same planet, much less in the same relationship. I had married him because I was in love with him. I idealized him and thought he was wonderful. But he had only married me for a green card with plans to leave after 3 years. He would legally marry his sponsor's daughter when she turned 18 and bring her to the U.S. where they would start their family. By that time, he would have finished his degree and they would buy the big house of his dreams. This girl knew about me, but I did not know about her. All 5 daughters were well aware of the plan. They each married a man of poor character who used other women to get them here. They should be ashamed. Their kids may or may not know about the devastation and broken hearts their parents left in their wake so that they could be born in America instead of a third world country. There are influential men behind these plans, and they brainwash these young men into committing immigration fraud, only to divorce in order to marry a Muslim woman. It's one way of spreading Islam in Europe and America. Yeah, I said it. And it needs to be said. They tell these young men that it's a fine and dandy thing to do, because we don't matter anyway. It's horrible and inexcusable to hurt another human being in this way, and it needs to stop. Finally, he gave me an exact date that he would be leaving. We were snuggled warmly together in bed. I said, "No, you won't, because you love me." He answered, "That is the problem." The day came, and I recalled his words on my drive home from work. It was a Wednesday. I went straight to the closet, and my heart dropped. His clothes were gone. Stunned, I saw the answering machine blinking. A message from him. He said that he was hurting too, and would come by to see me. I began crying into the night and having to still go to work. I became physically and emotionally drained and developed social anxiety. I felt depressed and exhausted all the time. I lost a lot of weight. My body was quivering inside. I saw several doctors and 2 psychiatrists. One young primary care doctor was a Muslim, and when I told him my story, he said, "You didn't really care about him." This echoed exactly what my husband had said. "You don't really care about me." It leads me to believe that sponsors must tell these men the same things. Another thing this ex said to me was that his friend told him that even when you live with a dog, you develop feelings for that dog. I can't imagine how many women have been destroyed by this scam. They must wonder, like I did, what they did wrong. Maybe if they hadn't have said this thing or done that thing, he wouldn't have left them. I feel so sorry for victims of this crime. Sure, there are bad women out there, but many of these girls are decent in character and in no way deserve such treatment. Even though my heart had been ripped from my chest, I did not hound him. I rarely called him. It seems he only called when he had a plot to carry out. With great effort, I pushed down my pain and went about my life, a shell of myself. The pills and sharing of me began after we had moved into the house. It could have happened while living at the apartment, but I don't remember anything from that time. I'm sure there are times that I don't remember, but there are enough that I do that lets me know that this was a common practice with him and his friends, and I wasn't the only one. One day Afon called to say that a friend worked as a hotel clerk and would let us use a room. We were still legally married and seeing each other, so I thought this would be a romantic excursion. When he picked me up, there were 2 sodas in the car. I thought it was a very nice gesture, not knowing that he had already spiked mine. As we were entering the hotel room, he said that his friend told him that men bring women here, and what did I think about it? I said it was romantic, to which he scoffed. I said, "Sometimes husbands take their wives to a hotel to get away for privacy, probably away from the kids." As he lay awake and silent beside me, I asked if we were going to stay the night, and he seemed to take my question as an argument, because he asked a gruff, "Why?" I said because I was getting very sleepy. It's apparent now that he was waiting for me to fall asleep from the drug he put in my drink on the ride over. They say we sleep, but our soul never does. His hotel friend knocked, and my husband let him in. Mortified, I felt him lift my arm, letting it drop onto the bed to check if I was out cold. It turned out this wasn't just a desk clerk. He was the hotel owner. The mirror wasn't just a mirror, it was a 2-way glass, and I was being filmed. As the man left, my husband asked if he was the only one there. The hotel owner went to call someone else, returning to say the other man couldn't leave until 6 a.m. Ifan mentioned the drug would wear off by then, and to tell the other guy to call later, but still insisted on payment. I think it was only $65. He was using me to pay his way through college, plus he was on a power trip having control over me. The next morning, Ifan nudged me, and when I didn't immediately respond, he nudged me more aggressively. I woke up feeling fine, and I didn't remember what had happened. That would come many years later. He drove me home and remained in the kitchen a while, saying he wanted to make sure I was okay before he left. About a week later, he stopped by and cooked me a meal and Kool-Aid. He stirred the Kool-Aid at the counter. He made me a plate, but he didn't eat. He sat across the table and just watched. There was no conversation. I was glad he was there because I had been feeling sick and hadn't had an appetite. It made me feel he cared about me. I started feeling drowsy and he noticed. He got up and said, "Are you ready?" He followed me to the bedroom, and before I fell asleep, we made out. Unknown to me, he let his missing friend from the hotel into the house. I awoke in the middle of the night with my underwear off. A man, who I thought was my husband, rolled over and slung his arm over his face. When I came back from the bathroom, he was still on his side with his head covered. Seeing him in the dim light, I realized that he didn't have the same shape as my husband. This guy had a more rounded middle. It would never have occurred to me that another man could be in my bed. Imagine my shock if I would have discovered a stranger. I started to say, "You don't want me to wake you up?" but just went back to sleep instead. The next morning, he was gone, so I just assumed Ifan had left before I woke up. Another time, Ifan called to take me to a restaurant. It turned out to be a small deli-like place with small round tables. At the same time, another Pakistani man and an American woman were taking a table next to us. He was very tall, over 6 foot, and very broad and heavy-looking. She was a large woman dressed very conservatively in a dress and had slightly curly sandy blonde hair. My husband and him gave each other knowing smirks, and the guy sniffed his 2 fingers in a most vulgar way. She and I both saw it. We barely stayed 10 minutes. It seems the whole point was just for their sick encounter. This guy was one of the 5 men who would marry the sponsor's daughters. This guy was repulsive and ugly. Soon, this same large man would invade my personal space in my own home, which made it feel even worse because I was in a place where I should have felt safe. I had clearly been drugged, and the room was very dark. I woke up enough to see a dark presence hovering over me, and I shrieked, but quickly lost consciousness again. This wasn't the only time he had taken advantage of me. These men seemed to treat us as if we didn't matter, using us for their own gratification. I feel sympathy for the other woman at the restaurant, believing that he cared for her, unaware that she was being used in the very same way. What happened to me was happening to her, and I'm sure my husband would be involved. Ifan called another time, saying that his friend, let's call him Nizar, who I knew fairly well, and his wife wanted us to join them at a restaurant. It would be a double date. I never got out much, so this sounded interesting. Ifan picked me up early evening, and it turned out to be a restaurant that served drinks and had a dance floor. We all got up and danced to a country song. Nizar and his wife sat down before us, and we joined soon after. She already had her drink. The young male waiter brought me an iced tea that Nazir had already ordered for me. Nizar's wife was silently nodding off, barely able to hold her head up. I soon felt sleepy, and when I told my husband, Nizar's wife nodded her slumped head. We entered the dark parking lot, and I expected to head to his car, but everyone else started walking towards the back of this club where there were motel rooms. I had not been told that we were going to be staying overnight. The friend's wife was stumbling ahead like she had been there before and knew right where their room was. I still remember the layout of the motel room, which was almost straight across from theirs. We made out, and I fell asleep. I became dimly aware that my husband was standing outside the motel door, soliciting men who passed by. His friend was doing the same because I could hear him. One man passing by replied to my husband, "That is not Islam," to which my husband called back that I was an American. His friend's wife was a Hispanic woman. Ifan called to Nazir that it was unusually slow that night and wondering where everyone was. Shockingly, this was in the era of AIDS. A foreign man entered the room. Was it the same man who had passed by? Did he decide to come back? Even though I am unconscious, a part of me knows his movements. He put his personal effects on a dresser while saying that I was going to do exactly as he says. Not that I was going to do anything, but this was part of his power trip. At one point he stood up on the bed, towering over me, taking pictures of my body. Ifan suddenly entered the room. He protested that he still had 10 minutes left, but my husband motioned him towards the door. He got his stuff and left. Ifan came over and turned my head to the left and to the right, checking my neck for marks. He left the room to go get Nazir. He was telling Nazir that he needed to get me back home. Nazir didn't see how this was going to happen because I couldn't walk and the car was in the parking lot. Ifan insisted, much to Nazir's frustration, and they drove the car to the front of the motel room. They helped me walk and helped me lay down in the back seat. We stood on the front porch while he tried to steady me, telling me to not fall as he fumbled for the keys. He jokingly said, "You shouldn't drink so much." He helped me to bed and said that he had gotten me back home where I would be safe. This wasn't genuine concern, but self-congratulatory. He graduated and got a job as a pharmacist in a hospital. He then moved to another part of the state, an hour away, to work at another hospital. Ifan did not tell me he moved, but I still had his phone number. I decided to move into an apartment and rent out my house to a new tenant, though I didn't call him for several weeks. Finally I called, and it sounded like he had run to the phone out of breath. He asked why I hadn't told him I was moving, and I said, "Well, you didn't tell me where you were moving. I don't know where you are." So he gave me his address, and I gave him my new address and phone number. I later found out from my new tenant that Ifan had entered the house one night. He claimed that he had knocked, but she hadn't heard him. I doubt that he knocked at all. She must have been scared. At a time before GPS, I was able to find my way to his house. I would visit very infrequently. One night, I heard him talking to another man in the living room. I overheard him say that he had 30 minutes with me. I fell back asleep and didn't remember anything the next morning. Ifan started a relationship with a nurse at the hospital where he worked as a pharmacist. I found about her one night as I was lying beside him. I said, "You have another girlfriend." He denied it, of course. I said, "Her name is Sandy." He said it wasn't. I said, "Her name is Sandra, but they call her Sandy, just like my name is Jennifer, but they sometimes call me Jenny." I even had an image of her in my mind, but that was the end of the discussion. Another time Ifan invited me to visit. He had a boat and took me out on the water. He had rented a small cabin near the launch dock. I'd been on boats before since my uncle had one, but I didn't know how to drive one. Ifan tied a tube behind the boat to pull me around the water. At first it was fun, and I was laughing, but then he swung the boat around so sharply that the waves created by the boat's wake almost knocking me off the tube. I managed to hang on. He took me out again, and this time the waves were much stronger, and I screamed as I was thrown into the water. There were people around who witnessed it. I knew how to swim, and was able to make it back to the boat, panting and with my heart racing. In hindsight, I think this was trying to get rid of me in a dangerous way. On another occasion, Ifan invited me over, saying that he'd bought an expensive piece of steak. When I arrived, the meal was ready. As I was eating, he picked at his food. To my surprise, I bit down on the tip of a large knife. He admitted that as he had been tenderizing the meat and the tip broke off and he couldn't find it, he had used me to find the knife tip. Afterward, he eagerly ate his expensive steak. All of these events made me realize that Ifan was not such a good person, and I began to distance myself from him. Nazir called one day. I was still struggling with memory loss from what had happened to me. He said he was angry with Ifan, and I got the impression that they'd had a falling out. Ifan didn't get along with Nazir's wife because of how she had treated him. Nazir told me that Ifan was just using me. It was then that Nazir revealed that Ifan had married me for a green card. He explained that the sponsor had 5 daughters and had sponsored 5 men to come to the U.S. to later marry his daughters, with Ifan being one of them. A few days later, Nazir called again and mentioned he had a friend who was 38 years old and had never married. He said his friend was worried that he might never get married and asked if he could introduce me to him, claiming he was a good person. I said I would think about it. The next week, Nazir called again, and looking back, I realized this was part of a plan to get me involved in something harmful. All 3 of these men knew each other and were part of a group of individuals in Houston who were exploiting women. I wasn't the only one, and I suspect this is still happening today. Since I still didn't remember what had been happening, nor Nazir's involvement, I said I would think about it, but I didn't. Then the next week when Nazir called, I agreed to meet his friend for dinner. It sounded like a safe enough idea, and at the time, I trusted him. The day arrived and Nazir picked me up. We drove to a nice part of town. It was a large 2-story brick house, but the high-arching entrance seemed intimidating in the dimming light. Nazir rang the doorbell and a man asked, "Did you bring her?" Nazir confirmed, and I also spoke up. I now realize how naive I was. There were only men there, and no dinner table at all. There was a tall, light-skinned man in the kitchen, and I assumed he was the owner. Nazir led me over to a chair near the stairs. There were 3 other men sitting on couches, and he introduced me to the man I was there to meet. Near him was his friend, and then Nazir introduced me to the third person. Nazir went into the kitchen, and the owner asked Nazir how much he thought I weighed. Nazir actually came over and asked me. Soon Nazir returned and brought me a glass of tea, which I thought was a casual gesture before dinner. But it wasn't. No one was speaking, neither to me nor to each other. For some reason, I never sensed any danger, which is not like me, being someone always on hyper alert. Maybe it was because I trusted Nazir. Soon, another guy arrived and he found Nazir in the kitchen. I overheard this guy worry that I might remember him. Nazir assured that I wouldn't and walked him over. To his relief, I didn't remember him. It was the hotel clerk owner from our previous encounter with my ex. I became dizzy and sleepy. The homeowner told me to go upstairs and lay down. I adamantly refused. My supposed date and Nazir also encouraged me upstairs. I swayed, and suddenly a man rushed up from behind and grabbed me by the shoulders. I shrieked. The owner scolded him and assured me that he was just making sure I didn't fall. This guy must have been hiding somewhere. Everyone rushed over and began escorting me up the stairs while I was saying I didn't want to. Before I could reach the last 2 steps, my legs would not move. The owner said to make sure I didn't fall. They were trying to get me to take those last 2 steps when I slumped. I was picked up and dropped on the bed. The owner chastised them because it could cause me to wake up. My legs were straightened, and it was now just Nazir and the owner looking down at me. The owner asked who would go first, and Nazir said he would. Meanwhile, the other men were lined up outside the closed bedroom door, each awaiting their turn. This is so horrible. And remember, I wasn't the only woman who had been brought there. They had their routine down. The one next in line was the man I had been brought there to meet. Let's call him Osad, and after him was his friend. There would have been 7 in all. The homeowner, Nazir, the 3 on the couch, the one hidden, and the hotel clerk. This whole experience is just ghastly. At morning, it was time for me to wake up from my drugging. Everyone was gone, and the owner helped me walk to Nazir's car, while laughing the familiar, "You shouldn't drink so much." Nazir was already behind the wheel with car running. I slept the way home. Ifan unexpectedly arrived that day, upset, and lay on the couch watching me. He asked when I went to bed, but I couldn't remember. Then I realized I was still wearing the same dress from the night before, and the entire memory, including Nazir's presence, was gone. Before leaving, Ifan said, "You're going to be," but trailed off. I asked him to stay, but he left, leaving me confused and sad for a moment, but I let it pass. I later realized Nazir likely informed him of what happened, probably gloating that he won over him. After 2 days, Nazir called and asked, "Did I ever introduce you to my friend?" I found this very strange. Wouldn't he remember if he had? I said, "No," so Nazir scheduled another dinner, which for me would be the first. I truly did not remember anything. What a powerful drug that is. This time I drove to the apartment complex where Nazir lived. He was waiting for me, looking around as if searching for something. He led me to the manager's apartment. We'll call him Eamon. I later learned that the complex was owned by individuals of Middle Eastern descent. Inside, people were sitting on the floor, and Nazir guided me to a spot next to Osad, who sat 2 seats to my left. In the center, a drummer was playing while others formed a circle around him. I noticed that, unlike before, there was another couple present, a woman and her husband. I found myself thinking that they were all kind and welcoming people. I complimented the drummer, who was facing me. Nazir approached and whispered something to Osad before stepping away. A moment later, Osad stood up. After a brief pause, Nazir returned to tell me that Osad wanted to speak with me. I followed them into the dimly lit hallway. Nazir and Osad stood in front of me, and suddenly, from behind, Iman seized my face, pressing a chloroform-soaked rag against it. He was strong, and I couldn't breathe. As I struggled to free myself, Osad grabbed my left wrist, and Nazir took hold of my right. In that moment, a thought flashed through my mind. This is how I'm going to die, just before I lost consciousness. Iman said, and I heard the woman in the other room make a startled sound. I don't think she was in on the plan, but was there to put me at ease. I don't remember being carried, but I found myself in a room on a small bed. I recall the drummer complaining to Iman about not having had his turn yet. Iman replied that he had to dose me every 15 minutes to keep me unconscious. By then there were likely 6 men already there, with more possibly arriving. I remember nothing else. Still having memory loss and trusting Nazir's judgment of this man, Osad began calling to talk, and we got to know each other over the phone. He invited me over for a homemade dinner, and I helped him in the kitchen. We sat in the living room to talk, and he told me he was from Islamabad, a retired jet pilot. It struck me that he was trying to impress me, but his words only irritated me. I told him I wasn't interested in those things, and that it's making me mad. He said, "Why are you alone in an apartment with a man?" I snapped, "Why are you alone with a woman in your apartment?" and stormed out. He tried to stop me, but I was very upset. I cried on the way home. Could it have been the suppressed memories? Time went by, and out of boredom and having nothing else going on in my life, I called Osad back to my eventual peril. We got along well after that and dated for 8 months before moving in together. One day Osad asked, "What date should we schedule our marriage?" I wanted January, but he wanted December. Unknown to me, he also needed a green card. We moved into the same complex where I'd been drugged. Insanity. Eamon, the apartment manager who had covered my face with the rag, had a wife who occasionally delivered food to my door, which I loved. But Eamon was the one sending it, and the food was tampered with. One day, after accepting another plate, I quickly felt sleepy and struggled to get to bed. I thought I was going to fall on the floor before reaching it. I became dimly aware that Eamon and Ifan were in the room. Eamon asked if Ifan would take me back if he could, but he said, "No, she's already been with too many men." Eamon then asked if he wanted me, and Ifan hesitated and changed his mind. The exact number of times I was drugged at that complex remains unclear, but many men took advantage of me there. Osad once said Eamon was the most religious man he knew, praying 5 times a day. After 3 years we moved to a condo where Osad's 2 male cousins and elderly aunt lived. Osad would cook, and we'd eat naan. He'd secretly spike my drink while sending me for more bread. Afterward, he'd tell me to go to bed, and sometimes I'd wake up to find his best friend sitting quietly in the living room. I went through nursing school and became a critical care nurse. Despite the years, we never grew close. He never shared anything about himself and didn't want to hear about my past life. Ladies, this is a warning sign. They don't want to humanize you. You're just an object to be used. Eventually, Osad and I moved to Nashville. I was being driven by an unknown force that made staying in Houston unbearable. I couldn't shake it. I blamed it on my sensitivity, but deep down, it might have been a subconscious feeling of being drugged and taken advantage of. We lived apart for almost 3 years before he joined me in Nashville, and we bought a house in 2001. A few years later, he got a job flying for the UAE, leaving me to live alone. While others found our separation odd, I felt fine being by myself. He would return occasionally, then leave again. In 2016, I needed cataract surgery, and Osad asked me to come to Pakistan for the procedure using his military medical. I flew there alone, a 22-hour flight, which was scary. Osad and his childhood friend, Havid, met me at the airport. We drove to Havid's house in Lahore. Not long after arriving, I was led to a room with a long conference table, where 5 men I hadn't seen arrive were already seated. Osad left me alone with them while Havid made small talk. He seemed to be the only one who spoke English. Osad came back, asked if I wanted tea, and then left again. I began to feel uncomfortable being alone with several men, and as I excused myself, I was encouraged to drink more tea. I returned to our room, lay down, and fell asleep, blaming it on jet lag and the time zone change. In hindsight, knowing what I know now, this scenario looks suspicious. Why were the men already there? Why was I left alone with them? Why did Osad leave me after bringing tea? Did they do to me what I suspect they did? Probably. After my cataract surgery, we traveled to Islamabad. His family was kind, and I met his sisters and their children. Both of his parents were deceased. One aunt arranged our marriage, and we were married by the imam after I was fitted for a dress. We flew back home together 2 weeks later. This time Osad stayed in the U.S., meeting a few Muslim friends. People liked him, but with me, he was always dissatisfied. He provoked arguments, couldn't stand being in the same room as me, and claimed I humiliated him daily, even though I hadn't done anything. Likely he couldn't handle knowing how many men had been with me. His friends probably saw him as married to a woman they'd consider unclean, which had to be humiliating. As he got older, Osad moved into his own room, and we spent most of our time apart. In 2018, Osad joined mechanic school. He met Parson, a 43-year-old single, never married gay guy. Asad became enamored when he overheard this guy ask, "Who is the Arab guy?" Mechanic school was long over before Osad finally brought his new friend Parson over, and I got to meet him. They'd always leave together to get spices, sometimes for hours. Osad also befriended someone at the mosque, Carpet Guy, who came over a few times. One evening, Osad sent me to the kitchen for naan bread and spiked my drink. We then made out in my bedroom. I went to sleep and became aware that Osad and the Carpet Guy were standing at my bedroom door. As the man approached me, he asked Osad why I had so much stuff on my bed. Osad responded, "Because she's trashy." Within days, I broke out with a severe rash that rapidly spread. I went to the doctor and got prescribed medication. There were other encounters with the Carpet Guy, but it was after this particular experience that I began remembering what had happened over the years. Initially, I remembered only what Afon had done, not remembering what Osad himself had been doing. I shared my memories with him, crying and making him hold me despite the fact that his embrace had never been soft or warm. He told me that Afon had been trafficking me. He also kept saying, "You're on video," likely referring to the first motel incident with the clerk owner, but he wouldn't explain further. He also said things like, "He didn't care about you," and "You weren't the only one," and "His wife knows about you." I began telling Osad that he had saved me, that he had come across the world to find me and rescue me. I felt it was so romantic and heartwarming. He was my knight in shining armor. I hugged him throughout the day. His cold, stiff hugs were my only therapy. The memories continued to come one by one and eventually caused me to go into a mental crisis. Actually, I went kinda psychotic. It wasn't a pretty sight. I stayed in my room and did not eat for 7 days. Osad didn't notice. He was too busy on his phone or laptop. When I emerged, I'd lost 15 pounds. It was after this crisis abated that I started to remember what Osad had been doing to me, but I decided to keep it to myself for a while and see where it went, knowing that more memories would surface. It came to a head one day when I overheard him tell Parson, "Bring the baby oil, that stuff feels good," realizing they were going to motels and Parson was more than just a friend. When I heard this, I didn't confront him, and soon Parson arrived and they left together. I would never have taken my husband to like men. He didn't seem the type, but I guess it's more common that we realize. Osad was always angry with me, and now that Parson was in the picture, he was worse. When Parson was there, the air would be tense, making me feel like an intruder. Nothing that I said was going to be okay. Just opening my mouth provoked hostility from Osad. Ladies and men, if your spouse is behaving like this, something is very wrong and you need to pay attention. In order to avoid their guilt, they have to demonize you. After all, to them, this is all your fault. We'd been married for 33 years, and he and Parson had been together the last 7. I calculated from the time Osad had started auto mechanic school to the day things came to an abrupt end. I had gone to Texas to visit my sister, but before I left, I bugged the house. I wanted to know the truth. Finally, I was taking some action. During this time, I was looking at houses in Texas. When I told Osod, he was furious, yelling that he wasn't going to move again. We had been in our current home for 24 years. The truth is probably because he didn't want to leave Parson. One time I called and he said, "Why do you keep calling here?" I suspect he wasn't alone. We had a Ring camera, and when I spoke to him through it just to play, he became absolutely livid, claiming I was spying on him. He covered the camera with a plastic bag, and it stayed that way until I got back home. He even asked my nephew if he could disconnect it. When I returned and heard what I'd captured, the marriage was over. Parson had arrived drunk, and Osod laughingly said, "Drunk guy." I heard some tussling, knocking on the hardwood floor, and then Osod say, "I'm so happy." Another time he said, "I should never have married her, that effing whore." I started packing, and Osod looked happy about it, obviously wanting me gone for good. He could have Parson over any time he wanted. Late that night I confronted him, demanding he leave by 4 p.m. He claimed, "Oh my God, I haven't seen Parson in 3 years." I then quoted parts of the audio I had recorded. He followed me. I stopped in the dining area and through strong emotions declared that he didn't rescue me. He had continued right where Ephon had left off. He was drugging me and letting other men have their way with me, that Eamon had chloroformed me, and he had held my left wrist, that both times I was to meet him I was drugged. He didn't deny any of it, just looked at me and continued to follow me to my room. I locked my door and told him I didn't want to hear it, repeating that he had to leave or I would call the cops and have him escorted out. The next day, he moved to a hotel, probably one he and Parson had stayed at. Before I could get a lawyer, he filed for divorce, making me look like the bad guy. We finalized the divorce in 2 months. I sold my rental property, bought the house in Texas, packed and moved 18 hours away, all within 4 months. I'm happy now and love where I live. It's beautiful here. How do I feel about all of this? It's been a real eye-opener. I had been married and divorced 3 times, and none of these men valued me. They didn't see me for who I was. They didn't respect me in any way. Mark physically and emotionally abused me. Ephon had preconceived ideas about who and what I was, placed there by the sponsor and his own culture. Osad also married me for the green card and knew full well what Ephon and the rest of their Pakistani community were doing to me, and he simply kept doing it. What these men thought about me and how they treated me is a far cry from who and what I really am. I will not let how they treated me define who I am. They lost out on a genuine relationship with a caring, giving, and loving partner. I was a good homemaker for Mark and made a good wife, but he beat me, spit on me, and cheated on me. I was as sweet as I could be to Ephon and had a true love for him. He saw me as someone with no value that was to be used. He drugged me and he cheated on me. With Osad, I felt I had a second chance at happiness and that he had rescued me. He knew what Ephon was doing because they ran in the same group, meaning that they both were drugging women and using them. Osad pegged me into this lifestyle as he continued to drug me, was spiteful and cheated on me. Not only with Parson, but with all those other women. Ephon tried to harm me several times, and near the end of our marriage, just before we filed for divorce, Osad moved a spray can behind me in the driveway. I stepped back onto it, and my foot flew out from under me, causing me to fall on the hard asphalt. I ran into the house. That's when I knew for sure it was time to get out. Prior to this happening, I had begun a series of, not dreams, but jerking awake with the sensation that I was tripping on my right foot. Each time this would happen, it would be worse until finally my right leg literally flew up in the air as I lay on the bed. That's when I told Osad and demonstrated by kicking my leg in the air. I told him to not let me climb up on anything because it's going to happen soon. Not even a week passed with it happened in real life. As we were going through divorce, I confronted Osad about what he'd done. I am now a young 67, and most of my life has been spent. I will never marry again and don't want to. I doubt I want another relationship. I ask you to pay attention to what is happening in your relationship and evaluate it truthfully. You might think they care about you as much as you care about them, but do they? It's easy to romanticize your relationship in your mind, despite the reality. I kept telling myself that Osad loved me and my family would tell me what a good man he was. In reality, he could hardly stand to be in my presence. He did the bare minimum. He never bought me birthday presents or Christmas presents, despite the fact that I constantly bought gifts for him. One year I gave him $2,000 and he did not spend a dime of it on a gift. We never celebrated our anniversary. We rarely did anything together and had absolutely nothing in common. These are the things to pay attention to, not the fantasy you create in your head. Remember, you have great value as a human being, even if the other person doesn't see it. Truly evaluate your qualities. Are you kind, generous, loving, and helpful? Do you care for the welfare of your family? Do you sacrifice for others? What have you overcome in your life? Just because another person, no matter who they are, doesn't recognize your good qualities or value you, don't let them diminish your own self-worth. Don't let another person insult you or mistreat you. You might be able to deflect the insults for a while, but it will chip away at you over time, and soon you will feel trapped. Open your eyes. See it for the truth, no matter how much that hurts. No one is going to save you. You have to save yourself. Osad didn't care to know anything about my life. We lived in two separate circles. I didn't know where he was going or what he was doing either. In hindsight, I'm sure part of his life included visiting the house where I'd first met him, taking advantage of hapless women whom they had drugged. Last night, I was thinking about the time Osad told me that Iman was the most religious person he knew. I was in the back seat of Iman's car and he was driving. Osad was in the passenger seat. At the time I thought, he's not really religious, it's just a front. Iman wasn't a big guy, but he had this hard edge to him, a sort of sternness. Remembering that I was in the back seat of Iman's car alarmed me. Where were we going? What happened? I remember now that we went to a Pakistani wedding at a 5-star hotel in Houston. High ceilings, chandeliers, and a huge ice sculpture outside the dining hall, special ordered for the wedding. It alone cost thousands of dollars, a show of wealth. There was a stage decorated for the couple to sit. The couple were young and beautiful, probably in their late 20s. There were about 150 to 200 people in attendance. The women and men stood in separate lines for their dinner, and the tables were in separate areas. I was seated, and Osad didn't sit with me. I didn't get to see the whole ceremony, and barely had time to finish my plate. Osad came to get me. Iman was already waiting for us outside the dining hall. He took off, and we followed. Osad said that Iman had to go somewhere, had something to do, and as we trailed off, I was in the middle, and Osad was behind. Across from the dining area was a hall, and Iman opened a door on the left and walked in. I continued to follow, and was confused to see it was a hotel room. Suddenly, Iman came around from behind and once again chloroformed me. From here, my mind goes blank. I'm assuming Osad was behind in order to help Iman carry me. It's shocking how much planning and discussion must go into these, all premeditated. How many men took advantage of me that evening, considering it was still very early in the celebration? Who all attending knew about this? What a heinous crime. I feel absolutely humiliated, being used as an object. What's worse is that so much time has passed that I feel I have no recourse, no restitution for what was done to me. In our divorce papers, Osad insisted it be written that I would not come back later and say or do anything to accuse or humiliate him. He refused to sign it otherwise. As I sit here, I have texted him about a set of keys in my possession. Nothing about what I remember from that evening. What does one even say? I remember what you did to me that night. And then what? He'll deny it and call me crazy. And he will likely start yelling, adding insult to injury. It appears I was a part of the venue for the evening, used by wealthy men who enjoyed indulging themselves. But to be fair, there is one other part of this night that I now remember. A man came into the room. He asked if I was clean, likely wondering where they had procured me. He was told that I was Osad's wife. Something was said, and after this exchange, nobody was coming. I remember being escorted back outside in a hurry by Osad, as one would move under cover of darkness. It surely boggles my mind that this could have been happening to me, having complete amnesia. Neither of my ex-husbands were who I thought they were. It's really hard to fathom. I remain stunned. Like this video, I have come to the end of this chapter of my life.